Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving right into the source material to analyze a hidden, microscopic battlefield raging inside your favorite glass of wine. You know, when we think of winemaking, we usually picture these gorgeous, sun-drenched vineyards, quiet cellars, and swirling a deep red in a crystal glass. But the reality? It's completely different. Literally, from the second a grape is crushed, it becomes the ultimate prize in a ruthless, invisible war.
It's easy to hold on to that romantic view, but the truth is, a crushed grape creates a highly contested ecosystem. Think of wine as a microscopic, all-you-can-eat buffet. It is absolutely loaded with organic acids, residual sugars, amino acids, and mineral salts. Now the good, specially selected yeasts are supposed to eat these nutrients to ferment the wine, but they aren't the only ones crashing the party. A whole host of rogue, contaminant yeasts are constantly trying to hijack the entire process, fighting tooth and nail for dominance in the liquid.
To make sense of this microscopic war zone, we're going to break down the source material's rogues gallery of 4 specific yeast villains. We've got the refermenter, the flor, the glue maker, and finally, the big boss.
Okay, but before we meet the villains, we need to lay down some ground rules. These microbial invaders are basically split into 2 attacking forces, and it all depends on how they breathe. On one side, we have the aerobic threats. These guys absolutely need oxygen to survive, so they sit right on the surface of the wine, attacking the ethanol and oxidizing it, basically leaving your wine tasting totally diluted and flat. On the other side, we have the anaerobic attackers. They don't need oxygen at all. They strike deep down inside the liquid, feasting on all those residual sugars and organic acids.
Which brings us to villain number 1, the refermenter.
So this guy is an anaerobic yeast. That means it does its dirty work deep inside the barrel, or worse, right inside a sealed bottle you've already bought. It essentially wakes up when it absolutely shouldn't, triggering this totally unwanted secondary fermentation that turns a beautiful sweet wine cloudy and fizzy. This usually happens in storage, when the filtration just wasn't aggressive enough. And the main culprit here? A formidable little microbe called Zygosaccharomyces bailey. It ruins the wine's texture by pumping out carbon dioxide, leaves powdery deposits everywhere, and can literally infect an entire winery like a plague. What makes this specific yeast so terrifying is its almost absurd list of superpowers. Normally, wine kind of protects itself, right? High alcohol, intense acidity, standard chemical preservatives, those are usually lethal to most microbes, but not to Zygosaccharomyces bailey. This thing easily shrugs off alcohol levels over 15%. It survives a brutally acidic pH below 2, it thrives in sugar concentrations above 70%, and those standard chemical preservatives, forget about it. It completely resists massive doses of sulfur dioxide and sorbic acid. I mean, it is basically a microbiological tank. Because this yeast is so incredibly tough, the winemaker can't just cross their fingers and hope it goes away. Their primary defense is a strict, methodical, step-by-step process. First, they have to aggressively clarify and filter the wine just to physically yank the yeast cells out of there. Then, they have to perfectly finish the fermentation to make sure there are no random sugars left behind for the yeast to snack on. And for sweet wine specifically, they strategically drop in potassium sorbate to just starve the yeast out before it can even multiply.
All right, moving on to villain number 2, wine flor, sometimes called the veil.
Unlike our first villain, this one is an aerobic attacker. It needs oxygen to survive, so it floats straight to the top of the wine and actually forms this physical, yellowish-white film right on the surface. A prime suspect here is Candida mycoedema. It hijacks the wine at the surface level, biochemically ripping apart the alcohol and turning it into carbon dioxide and water. And the result of that? Well, it skyrockets the volatile acidity and gives off this overwhelming acetaldehyde odor. It literally strips the wine of all its unique character, leaving it completely tasteless and insipid. Now, before we write off all surface yeasts as pure evil, the source material points out a really fascinating duality here. We have to contrast this destructive wine flor disease with beneficial flor yeasts. These beneficial ones are actually used on purpose to protect and enhance certain wines, like sherries. Just look at the stark differences here. The disease thrives in low alcohol and totally ruins the wine, but the beneficial flor yeast, it actually needs high alcohol, adds a beautiful bouquet to the wine, and creates this reductive environment that naturally shields the wine from other microbes. It's crazy how thin the line is between a ruined batch and a masterpiece. But to starve the bad guys, those destructive, aerobic flora invaders, winemakers use some hardcore defensive steps. The mission is simple: eliminate the air. So they routinely refill tanks and barrels to ensure there's zero empty headspace.
They pump inert gases like nitrogen or carbon dioxide right into the tanks to push all the oxygen out. And when they're capping the bottles, they use inert gas again just to prevent any accidental air from getting trapped inside. Basically, no oxygen, no val. Let's check out villain number 3, the glue maker, responsible for the estery taste. Okay, if you've ever popped a cork and immediately smelled nail polish remover, you've met the glue maker. This massive defect is usually caused by an indigenous yeast known as Hanseníspora uvarum. What makes this one so incredibly tricky is that it's actually found directly on the grape skin itself, out in the vineyard, especially if the grapes have been infected by botrytis. If there's too much air contact early in fermentation, or just poor hygiene in the cellar, this yeast goes into absolute overdrive. It pumps out excessive amounts of acetic acid and a compound called ethyl acetate that completely wrecks the wine's natural delicate aroma. And here is the truly shocking part, the detection threshold. It takes an unbelievably tiny amount of ethyl acetate to ruin an entire batch. We are talking just 0.15 grams per liter. That microscopic amount is all it takes to make your wine smell unmistakably like aggressive glue or varnish. It essentially takes this beautifully crafted beverage and makes it smell like something you'd find in a hardware store. Because this glue defect starts out in the vineyard right on the grape skins and then blows up due to poor hygiene, winemakers have to be hyper-vigilant from the exact second of the harvest. They need to make sure the grapes arrive at the winery perfectly intact. No breaking, no exposing the juice to that skin yeast prematurely. They strictly control the temperatures during maceration. They deliberately add the good yeast, Saccharomyces, really early on so it can just outcompete the bad guys. And above all else, they have to maintain rigorous, almost surgical cleanliness in the winery. Which brings us to villain number 4, the big boss, Brettanomyces. This is the ultimate microscopic supervillain of the wine world. It's so infamous, it actually spawned its own specialized vocabulary. The origin story and the source material is wild. It was first isolated back in 1905, not in wine, but in beer. It was the specific yeast that gave certain English beers their distinct flavors during secondary fermentation in oak barrels. That's actually where the name comes from. Brettanomyces literally translates to British yeast. But fast forward to the 1940s and 50s, and this British yeast jumped over to French and Italian wines, realizing it absolutely loves living in oak wine barrels.
So how does this big boss ruin your wine? Well, the phenomenon is officially called the Brett character. Brettanomyces speeds up the loss of those nice fruity esters. But far worse, it triggers the decarboxylation of the natural acids in the wine, turning them into volatile phenols, like 4-ethylphenol. These are highly stable, incredibly smelling molecules that just completely obliterate the beautiful fruit aromas the winemaker intended.
To really grasp how aggressive these volatile phenols are, just look at the actual sensory descriptors experts use. When Brettanomyces takes over, it replaces those nice, fruity smells with things like synthetic plastic, burnt rubber, and literal Band-Aids. And if it leans into the animal-type aromas, your very expensive glass of wine can smell like a wet dog, a used gym sock, cow manure, or literally horse sweat. It is an absolute catastrophe for the senses. Defeating a foe this formidable requires some serious firepower. Winemakers have to unleash a whole arsenal of intense physical and chemical treatments. They aggressively scrub and disinfect their oak barrels with sulfur or even ozonated water. If a batch actually gets infected, they might use flash pasteurization, using heat to just physically destroy the microorganisms, or employ something called separative amicrobial filtration. They'll even drop in targeted molecules like chitosan. It's this antimicrobial polymer that specifically hunts down Brettanomyces and actually helps pull those nasty volatile phenols right out of the liquid. Ultimately, what this explainer of the source material reveals is that winemaking is just as much about microscopic warfare as it is about agriculture. Behind every gorgeous serene vineyard and behind every quiet oak barrel is a winemaker acting as a tactical general. They are fighting a 24/7 invisible war, balancing pH levels, strictly managing oxygen, deploying advanced organic chemistry, all just to protect the delicate ecosystem inside your bottle from being completely overrun. So, I'll leave you with this final, provocative thought. Now that you know about the refermenters, the aerobic flor, the glue makers, and the horse sweat-scented big boss lurking in the cellular shadows, will you ever be able to look at or smell your next glass of wine the exact same way again?